of Charles P. Guenther of 5607 West Maple Rapids Road in St. John's, Michigan, 48879. Charlie's phone number, area code 517-682-4241. Charlie also maintains a residence in Florida at P.O. Box 248, Placida, Florida. This is from November 1st through May 1st. This recording was made by Jim Walkinshaw at the Oldsmobile History Center at 4000 North Grand River in Lansing on October 30th, 1990. This is tape number 1 of 3 tapes. Charlie, if you'd just start, if you would, please, with your name and your address and your phone number.
Now, this is Charlie Guenther, 5607 West Maple Rapids Road, St. John's, Michigan, 48879. My telephone number is 682-4241. Now, that's only between May 1st and November 1st.
You got to play somewhere else then the rest of the year?
and the rest of the year is spent in Placida, Florida, a mobile home park. There's only one in Placida. And part of the summer is spent up at the lake, and my kids are threatening me because I haven't got a phone up there, so I can't give you a number up there.
Do you have mailing address in Florida, or how does that work?
Post Office Box 248, Placida, Florida.
And a zip? Do you remember the zip?
Oh.
Okay, don't.
I'd have to look it up.
Don't worry about it.
I have a telephone down there too, and but that's on my little magic card. You know, that's the one. If I get lost, they can look it up and send me home.
Now, maybe you could go back, Charlie, to when you started at the plant, what you were doing, and what was going on.
Well, mine is an interesting beginning. I only stopped at Oldsmobile to raise hell because they were real interested in me, and while I was in the service. And they sent me a wire which they addressed to Red River Arsenal, and being 10,000 people there, and they addressed it as Charlie Guenther and not Corporal Guenther. You know, it took 2 weeks for them to find me. And I wrote back and said, yes, I was interested. And I never heard from them. So I got an interview with AC Sparkplug in Milwaukee and another one, Saginaw Steering Gear, and in driving between the two places, I went through Lansing. So I just stopped in to chew somebody's butt out, to say, why send me a wire and never respond? Mm-hmm. And Matt Campbell was jumping up and down with joy. He said, we had some, I think Mr. Good, the high muckety-muck in salary at that time, had some kind of surgery, and a bunch of other people were off, and the whole office got fouled up more than what it usually fouled up. And when they never saw my response, so cheap old Oldsmobile they said, why don't you stay over? And I had to pay for it out of my own pocket. Stayed in the damn Hotel Olds, and they rushed me over to see R.P. Russell, and he interviewed me, and Ditto interviewed me, and I went back to Texas, but because I wasn't out of the service yet, and they made me an offer, and that's how I came here. But it was this.
When was that, though? What date?
Oh, that was for the interview, I think, was in September, October of 1952.
Okay.
And when I got discharged November 2nd in Texas of that year of 52. And then we closed up shop and we're out of there, but it took a while to get back up here and organize.
Yeah.
Went to work November 17th then of that year.
Okay, all right.
And
how come you picked Oldsmobile then, out of all the other places you looked at?
Well, and this is, this you'll understand. Saginaw wanted me to go to work in the time study department, and I said, no goddamn way would I ever work in a time study department. And the guy I'm talking to here once commandeered me into the time study department. I was in it for 3.5 years, and I wore a black I wore a black armband for 3 weeks because I went in the time study department. But actually, it wound up much better than I anticipated. We had a good time there.
But Saginaw wanted you in the work standard for time study.
They wanted me in work standards. AC spark plug. I told them the one thing I would not do is work on a design board.
Okay.
And when I got there, they interviewed me for design work, and the assistant director of personnel happened to be a Yale grad, and he took me aside after everybody else left, and he says, "Look, Charlie, you don't want to work in this goddamn place."
Because he was gonna.
He said, because he says, not a good place to work. He says, not a very AC spark plug, just not a very happy place, and you don't make a hell of a lot of money. He says, go over to the automotive divisions, you know. And
okay.
And
so you had some guidance from the.
yeah, well, this guy was he graduated a couple of years before me, and at Yale, and so he just told me, wrong place to work. Yeah. Very unusual.
Yeah, sure is. Yeah.
But that's how it happened. So when I came to work, we had an infamous methods group there. It was called Methods Engineering at that time, and it was Mike Harper and Ed Ditto, Mooney, Bob Mooney, Jerry Klinger, Bob Truxell, Don Putnam, and a few other people. A lot of those people became quite famous.
Yeah.
And every time I see the Health Choice TV ads with Mike Harper, who used to be in those days was just skinnier than hell, and it was all 6'5" or 6 of him, and now he looks like a teddy bear, you know. I always remember the story when he and Truxell, early in the ball game, almost the first year we were there, he worked out in the plating plant, the old plating plant.
Building 78 plating.
Yeah. And they tried something new. They used Truxell's bow, and they made some kind of special arrangements so they could load and unload bumpers faster for plating. And they didn't get home until 4:30, and Mike came in at 7:30. So a couple hours later, he just about showered and took a little nap and came back in. And then on his annual review, Ditto wrote him up as using that as an example that he wasn't very perky that morning. So from then on, because we had the offices used to be on the outside where they are now, but there was only a small wall. And from then on, Harper would always hurdle the wall as he went in to see Ditto, because he was so goddamn mad about it.
So who was your immediate boss then?
Ed Ditto.
Ditto was.
But Ditto was, about that time, we had the fire down at Hydromatic, and Ditto left, and he never really came back. So I worked for Truxell. All we had was lead engineers at that time. That's before and so I worked for Truxell.
All right.
And Mooney and Ken Knight, Bob Mooney and Ken Knight and I were the January after I got here in November, and then in January we went to the Saginaw Street plant, and we just opened the place up. Okay. They were just still setting equipment over there.
For the jet job.
For the jet job. And then Bob and I and Ken were the three people that worked over there with Crickmore and the layout department, and the old councilman was our clerk over there. Lou Adato was the clerk over there, and he finally got the hell out of there, and Dave Ludwig came along. So we actually took that thing up and made it fly.
What were you guys doing?
We were methods engineers.
But what kinds of jobs were you guys doing?
Strictly job improvement. To take time out of the play, take people out of it. And I didn't find this out. John Niehaus was over there. John his people, he was, head accountant over there. And I guess John almost had a heart attack, because one time Mooney he was moving out, and he told me, we were going down to 2 engineers instead of 3, and he went to the forge plant. And Bob said, there's no damn way you can take anything out of my area. It's perfect. You know, he was a little egotistical in those days. So the first job I went into the blade area, and he had one man running 2 machines. One man had a terrible time with 3, but we had enough capacity. Really, one man could run 4, and the union thought that was so funny, you know, that was so ludicrous that they went in and said, sure, we'll do a time study on that. So Shanahan went in from time study, and he time studied it. And when it got done, he said it works beautifully. And that only took 32 people out per day.
Out of Mooney's perfect place.
Out of Mooney's perfect place. Then we did the same thing in the other ones, and I think we took out another 8. And that's when I first met Bill Murphy, because Bill Murphy wrote these things up for the end of the year of, you know, things that we've accomplished, so he could brag about it to the ordnance department. And I found out years later that John Niehaus almost had a temper tantrum. He says, Jesus Christ, he says, are you nuts? You take out all these people. Look at the profit you're taking out of this goddamn plant.
Yeah, because it was a cost plus.
Cost plus. Yeah. So we really bled. But Murphy was very happy because he looked at it, you know, and the government was happier than hell because we did. And I was happy because Mooney had told me that no way could you take anything out of there. So those were, you know, and we got the jet plant. It flew. Ray Burns, there was a professor that used to come in for the Pratt & Whitney airfoil grinders. He was a German professor, had his doctorate. And because when you first started on them, you know, they just polish on those the blades forever and take an hour or so to grind them.
Yeah.
And Ray Burns was an independent cuss, and he said, that's bullshit. So he worked with a grinding company, and they got a spray, a wax spray that they sprayed on the blades, and they did the grinding, and they cut the time from half an hour to an hour. They went all the way down to 2-3 minutes.
What did the wax spray do?
It was a coolant and a lubricant.
It just helped.
It was a coolant and lubricant.
That was the reason they had to go so slow, huh? To
Well,
keep it not from overheating.
Keep it, yeah. Well, you couldn't take any distortion because you had a master blade, and you had a whole bunch of these, and you kept, you know, you took the forgings from the forge plant in, and they cut them down in there. There was a rough, and then there was a finishers, which were separate machines, as I recall. And they took all the time out. And the first thing, when the German professor heard about it, he came in and had shit fits. And he says, you are ruining my machines. You know, he says, we take back in the warranty. I'm going to void the warranties because, and about 6 months later, he came back and he says, please, please. He says, I'm going to get fired if you don't teach me how to do this. And so Oldsmobile really was quite instrumental in developing a very good, you know, a very good compressor that way. And not only that, but ours tested and passed the tests, our units combined with Buick's, before the airplane company, the engine company. Curtis Wright. Curtis Wright. And they couldn't qualify their engines, and they finally had to buy our stator and compressor units.
Really?
And use them on their engines so they could qualify in the beginning. And Air Force people afterwards told us that you could always tell the difference. You know, it's almost as much difference as there is between V6s built in Lansing and V6s built in Flint. And so we built those for a hell of a long time, you know.
Do you remember how many we'd make in a day, Charlie? Engines?
No. Oh, God. And I had turbine and disc and blade assembly. I think we did 1 an hour for 16 hours a day.
Tell me about assembly, how you put it all together. Do you remember how they did that?
Well, some of us, there were a lot of shrink fits where they cooled things and heated things and pushed them all together. And then Del McRae headed that whole thing. He was superintendent down there. And then we'd put them down. We put the whole units together, and then we'd put them down into a huge pit, and we'd bring them up to speed. And Lou Preston was the general foreman in that area, and Bob Scott was the superintendent. And you know, you'd have to spin them and bring them up to speed. They were steam-powered turbines that brought them up to speed. I don't think we ever lost any.
Oh, really? Didn't blow one up?
I don't think we blew one up. And it wasn't like the, you know, that was the one thing that always made me fearful was when we had the cannon plant next door to.
Building 30.
And they weren't quite straight. They put them in the straightener. And I guess we never had a case, you know. Did you ever see how far they actually bent those things?
Sure. Well, it looked like it was.
Yeah. You know, they bend them through. Yeah, they put this great big piece of steel in there, and then they'd bend it like a pretzel and bend it 3-4 feet. Downey, who used to, a lot of people didn't realize he was with the Ordnance Corps in the Navy. And
this is T.C. Downey or
Don Downey. Don Downey.
Okay.
And he was in one of the plants. He used to go inspect these things at naval armories and whatnot. And he was in the place where one of these huge guns was being straightened that way, and it broke.
Oh my Lord!
And it went through a 3 or 4 foot reinforced concrete wall. Just went through it just like a shot. And nobody was killed, but I had vision. I know, and I never walked over there because I heard that story about what happens when they break. And I always took the long way to final assembly because that scared the hell out of me. And in those early days, of course, then we had we had the mortar.
Yeah, the 3.5-inch rocket.
Yeah.
That's the one you're thinking of?
No, I can't remember. I was trying to remember how many millimeters it was. But we had that thing that we were building over there. That didn't last very long.
Did you ever get into the pilot part of the jet engine thing at all, Charlie, or did that precede you?
Well, that was the end of it, because they were building them over there, and that was over in 37 or somewhere.
Okay, that's where it was, and
that's somewhere's over in there.
Okay.
But they were just in the process of moving, because they were already setting up machines, so they were tearing it down. When I got there in November, I walked into the area, and all I can remember, some of it already had been moved over there. When we got over to the jet plant, it was, you know, almost all flat floor, you know, open, and the machines were just coming in.
Was the building all done?
Yeah.
The
building was all done. Well, there might have been a little bit here and there.
Yeah, but basically
it was completed, and it didn't take long for us to set that whole place up, and we were building engines in no time.
Okay.
And we built those for quite a few years then. And then the gun slowly phased out.
Did you get involved with the gun at all, or?
A tiny little bit. A tiny little bit. We got drawn back over into I think actually I was into the gun a little bit before I got into the jet, but not really enough to really do anything. There wasn't really much. There was really not
it was mostly all lathe work, wasn't it?
Yeah, and there were methods work. There wasn't enough that you could really do differently. I still have the tool that Drexel invented for the thing for he's got a mondoon of a tool. I was going to send it to him at his retirement party. You know, it drives a little pin that's about a half an inch long and a 1/16 of an inch. You know, no way would anybody ever use it. Jerry Klinger, was in his desk when I took his desk over. And so I was, you know, we played with that, and we got drafted for some work in the engine plant, very beginning.
Most of the folks in the early methods department then were assigned to an area, or how
to an area.
Does it work?
to an area.
To an area.
Now, each one, you had an area. Bob went over and he made all the Mooney Go Devils over at the jet plant, over at the forge plant. And none of which, the only one that ever worked, his crony over there, who was over in product engineering, who was drafted out of our place by Wolfram. He did the systems work, and then he went over there.
Dick Hill?
Dick Hill.
Yeah.
Dick Hill invented one of those Go Devils.
Mm-hmm.
And that was the only one that ever worked. And in later years, Mooney had a slip of memory and used to talk about that one, but even that one, it used to reach into the big press, the crankshaft press, and it would lose its arm. It just wasn't that fail-safe.
Mm-hmm.
But all the other Go Devils went out in the scrap heap. Nothing ever worked that Mooney invented that way, but he did get a lot of publicity for it over there. And
but they were the guys then. You would have one or two guys area assigned.
yeah, like jet plant, we had three to start
three
with.
there, and then down to two.
And they had two over at the forge plant. For a while, they tried to do something to modernize the forging end of the business, and because that was the tail end of the making the forgings for the blade forgings. And so Mooney and Dick Hill were over there for a little while.
And then would you have some in car assembly at that time?
Yeah, well, they were process group.
Okay, so the process group.
And the process group was headed up by Bill Slachter.
Okay.
And
he was up there in 40, was he?
oh yeah,
Right.
all of our offices right there,
Okay.
right there where Bob Russell's office was, right there in the middle where we stayed for years.
Bullpen, were you guys out there?
Yeah, we were in a bullpen, and the people that worked in final assembly were Stedman, Putnam, Ellenwood was sort of by himself. He invented things for them that never worked out there.
Mm-hmm.
And Putnam and Jerry Klinger was in that group. I took Jerry Klinger, I followed him around because when I came to Oldsmobile, he went into assembly processing.
Okay.
And he had been originally, he came to Oldsmobile from Bell Aircraft. He worked on the original Bell Air, the XS-1, the first,
the rocket.
yeah, the rocket, Bell's first venture into that. And then he moved into the assembly group, and I went into the other, with the jet plant.
See, now, in addition to the assembly group, was there a bunch down in the engine plant at that time?
Yeah, there was an engine group, and I think that was, Borkman was already back. No, Borkman wasn't back yet, and I can't remember who headed up the engine group at that time. But I know...
and you guys all worked for Ditto?
yeah, we all worked for Ditto.
Slachter worked for Ditto?
Slachter worked, yeah. And they were only called lead engineers. They were seventh level.
Level people.
Yeah.
All right.
And I guess the next real thing that happened was the big explosion when, Slachter left and became general foreman out in final assembly.
Okay.
And worked for Mike Minnow.
That would have been, you got a feel for about when that would have been?
That had to be about the end of the 56 run.
Okay.
We weren't into 56s.
All right.
And so...
You were still over at the...
I was still...
At the jet plant at that time, or had you left there?
I was still at the jet plant.
Okay. All right.
If I recall.
All right.
And let me see, I'm just trying to recall. There was a big shakeup because Mooney, somewheres along in there, had gone in, he was moved into that job. He knew nothing about final assembly. And when Slachter moved, Stedman thought he was going to get the job.
Mm-hmm.
And Stedman didn't. They gave it to Mooney based on all of the
forge plant,
all the failures in the forge plant,
Mm-hmm.
and he was a shining light, and people threatened to quit.
Oh, in the department?
Oh yes.
Oh, really?
Oh yes. Klinger left. He went to product at that time, and they went around and they talked to Chuck Cates. Chuck Cates and I guess we were already over there. We were doing job improvement
At Plant 1?
at Plant 1
All right.
in different places. And because I remember, I still have a piece of paper, the final assembly processing boys always used to work 50, 60 hours a week, and we never worked any overtime.
Okay.
And we put out a thing that said, job improvement extraordinary, we will do we will do any of your dirty work on the weekends, anything to work overtime, any menial job. We got reprimanded because we put that out, because there was no equalization of hours.
Not for salary guys.
Not for salary people. So when all of this trauma came and Mooney was made superintendent or group leader at final assembly, Klinger left, and they had to fill his place. Don Putnam wanted to go right over there too, and Russ Hansen and Mooney never knew this. This is all done without Robert's knowing it. Russ Hansen gave him a big raise to stay 1 year, and he guaranteed him he would get him a job over there with Klinger the following year, because they just couldn't see the whole department leaving. It just, mass evacuation. And Stedman went to reliability, and so they had a lot of people they had to draw in there. They talked to Chuck Cates first, and in his typical ex-commander from the National Guard who'd been over in Manila with the killing Hucks over there, with the killing Japanese. He told them the stuff that were, and I told them if they tried to put me over there, I said, Mooney and I we're real good friends from our work at the jet plant. Our families, we've had babies together. I said, you'll make me the world's most unhappy man. And so the next morning they moved me over there. See, I didn't threaten to quit. So I was over there. And that's how I got over there. And once again, I took Jerry Klinger's job.
But now you're in the car assembly world.
But now I'm in the car assembly world.
Okay.
And the first thing that Russell said, because I took over Jerry Klinger's area, and they had been, he had said, now, one thing, if you ever let happen what happened this year, where they were air freighting in reamers because the bumper holes didn't fit, and they couldn't put bumpers together, and they kept shutting the line off. He says, if you ever have a situation like that, I'm going to fire you, Charlie. So I took over in the middle of that. And Mooney, of course, the first thing he did was to come up and engineer an automatic frame loader. He was going to take those people out and do it automatically.
Oh, okay.
And he built that. And Don Putnam, who couldn't stand Robert because of what had transpired, talked him into keeping the backup equipment so you wouldn't shut it down. And Mooney told him, he says, you're nuts. He says, it'll work. Well, it didn't. And they put the frame loader in, and Rollis kept running out there and threatening to kill people because it shut the line down and we weren't building cars. And Minnow, of course, was a very understanding superintendent.
Right.
He would ricochet off the walls, and it lasted about a week, 10 days. And we only turned it on a couple of times. And the only thing that's kept Mooney from being fired is he had the backup equipment there, because it didn't work. Just like all his other goddamn go-devils. And, but the funny thing was, I think probably the most remarkable thing, and, when Mooney kept moving up and up and up.
Very rapidly.
When he finally got up on the 7th floor, or sixth level, over there, I was in a meeting one time where we were just standing around bullshitting, and he was telling old stories, and he says, that goddamn frame loader that Stedman invented, he says, It just shows you how dumb Stedman was. And I talked to Stedman, who used to be a salesman by the manufacturer's rep.
Yeah.
I met him in the lobby one time. I says, Bob, I said, did you know that you invented that frame loader? He says, you're crazy. He says, I told Mooney the goddamn thing wouldn't work. You know, he's...
Okay, Stedman told Mooney?
And he had told him, you know, it wasn't going to work, just like Putnam and the rest of us told him it wasn't going to work. But by that time, and this is perhaps one of the reasons that, you know, that I finally started changing my attitude with Bob, because, you know, there were many times when I had make or purchase that Bob would come down and visit with me, and he would say, now, what's the answer on this one? I said, well, we're not quite done. We don't, well, what do you think the answer is going to be? And so I told him what I thought the study was going to show. And then he had a temper tantrum and chewed my ass out, and we started screaming at one another. And I know a couple of the tech students that were working in the area, they ran, and they went and hid over their time study. And they didn't come back for a couple of hours. And I said, my God, does that happen around here often like that? You know, and the next morning, Bob came in and apologized to me. You know, he says, I always talk to you because when I'm wrong, you tell me. Well, I told him for several years, but when he finally got up there and he started changing history, that was when I finally said, okay, Bob, you know, because, well, the next day he came back and he went after he apologized. He says, what's the answer? How did it come out? And I said, wait a minute. And I said, first you got to tell me one thing. I said, you know, what would you like the answer to be? I says, because you can only be stupid like that once. But unfortunately, that was one of the things with Bob that he did after he, you know, his terrible temper.
Was that apparent when he was down there at the early, when you were working for him in the early days? No. It didn't show until he, somewheres along the line it came, but it was long after he was supervisor and whatnot. But we had a lot of fun out there in final assembly. I think one of the only job that Chuck Cates and I got, we did finally get a job out there that Ellenwood had invented these famous inline towing machines. That's when the lines, you know, a lot of people today don't even remember that the final assembly line ran 110 jobs an hour. And, you know, front end drop was almost a free fall. And so was the body, you know, because you had to run 113 an hour to net 110. And then you went into the test rolls, and then you separate at the test rolls. You separate into two lines, and they ran 55 an hour apiece. And Ellenwood built. He spent $250,000, which in those days was a hell of a lot of money. It would have been, yeah.
And we put in. There was a fast index. They grabbed the cars and then fast index into the station, and then you did towing. And then
this was on the end of the.
It was right in the middle of the, close to the end of the repair lines, and then you indexed out of there and you continued on down the line.
It wasn't a thing that traveled along with the flat tops.
Oh no, you got a fast index, and he invented them, and they said, well, Al's too goddamn busy on another project, so you and Charlie Cates, you know, you two go down and you make it work. You know, and it's the only time where you could get hung up in the things when the fast indexes start. You had to duck, you know, get out of the way. And my shirt, my wife had just got me a nice new dress shirt with long sleeves, and I was hung up in there because I was, even in those days, I was a little, you know, I was 240, and to get out of there, I just. When the fast index started, I got the hell out of the way, and it tore every button off of my shirt. It ripped the shirt all too, you know. And Charlie and I, and Al would keep coming over and saying, gee, do I have to come over here and make that work? And we finally filled it in. You know, our final recommendation between the two of us was that, you know,
take it out, tear it
out. Take it out. And we took it out.
What was basically wrong with it?
Just, you know.
Too fast?
Too fast. You couldn't, you know.
For the era?
Yeah. And it was just too high a cycle. Because after all, it took a lot of, just to index the car in, took a lot of time, and with a, basically, you're doing almost 60 an hour, and with a fast index, you really don't have much time to get underneath there and set the damn thing. And
was that the first attempt at some kind of an automatic gadget that you're aware of?
Yeah. The other thing had been, Truxell had invented the one that was over there on the, was just after front end drop.
It was on the flat top.
On the flat top, yeah. And Truxell had invented one over there.
That one must have went along with the line.
It did,
yeah.
It went.
To get back
yeah.
and pick up the next car.
Yeah.
I take it that one did or didn't work?
It worked. But it was, but towing machines just really were not that good.
Right.
And you really got to, you can't simulate what the condition. You got to have the car completely built with all the things on it, because it changes. It sets differently. It's like an old lady sitting on a potty, You got to get the conditions there and really know what happens. And that one was finally torn out.
The Truxell one?
The Truxell one was, I got some Tech Center ones that I put in, I think, in 1958.
Okay.
End of the line, and that was the first, and then those stayed for a long, long time.
And these were at the end of the assembly line again, Charlie?
Yeah, these were at the end of the line, completed car, you drove in, and you picked up, and then you electronically sensed them.
Okay.
They had been, they had one or two of those. Terrytown had one. And by that time I was working for Downey, and I always enjoyed that, because in those days Downey took the trip to Terrytown, got to look at the machines. I bought the goddamn thing, and I had to make it work. I never got to go look at it. One guy went, and he never came out to make it work. But those are some interesting years. We used to set headlights down on the test rolls. That was quite an installation we put in there, where we came up and we probed the car, lifted the car up on the frame and put it in a theoretically correct position, and actually, looked into condensing lenses that were about over 30 inches across, and then actually picked up the hot spot. But that also, they would. All of that, we were at the edge of the development edge of science, or leading edge of technology, and we just couldn't stabilize the things. That's when Downey really helped us that one day. We could only make the things stabilize from 6:30 in the morning till noon, and then we had to go in and re-aim all of this electronic sensing equipment. Yeah.
Wow.
And Truxell had given Downey some other assignment. He wanted a rejector. So he worked overhead, and he put up a soap spray. And if the thing wasn't in spec, he was supposed to put a glob of a rejection on the windshield. Well, and if he got up there on top of it while we were trying to master the thing up, and he got up on the machine, it would ruin the settings that we had, and he didn't give a damn, because his job was to do the other. And I used to almost physically kill him, except he was too little. And so he finally got it rigged up, and he got it working, and it worked for 1 hour, and then all of a sudden something went wrong, and every car came down the line, and the windshield was completely sprayed. Not just the daub, I mean the entire windshield. And Slackta had just become superintendent, and he came out of that office. Turn that son of a bitch off! Get every car, and the drivers couldn't drive them off the end because they couldn't see. And Downey's running around, shaking his hands and jumping up and down, and he doesn't know what the hell to do. And we didn't help him. We let the son of him. And Slackta told him, "Don't you ever turn that son of a bitch on again. That was fine with us because we were trying to aim, we were trying to aim the headlights, and the checking device was sort of a Truxell invention. Oh.
I take it those were typical activities in the method sponge.
Well, we kept getting closer and closer to these inventions of God. And I think the worst one we ever ran across was Slakta and Truxell were the world's greatest competitors. And Truxell, or when Slakta was superintendent of final assembly, he invented the Pride system out there, where the workers marked up their defects.
That was a Slakta thing?
That was a Slakta, the Pride system, where that was his. And the Purdue executive vice president, whose name he died hunting pheasant that one year, Rollard, Ed Rollard.
Yeah, Ed Rollard.
Ed Rollard came down, saw that, and just loved the hell out of it. And he was just enthralled. He came back several times. Rollard was also a very good bridge player. And Truxell became Ed Rollard's, bridge partner at the thing down in West Virginia.
Oh yeah,
the Greenbrier.
Yeah.
And they won the bridge championship. And Truxell told Rollard the Pride system wasn't worth a shit. And he had a black box that he had invented, that he had already developed. And he told him exactly how it worked. And this black box that the people talked into a microphone, and the repairman would record what was wrong with this particular model, and then the inspector would do that, and the people working on the line would do that, and they just talk into this little black microphone on their lapel, and then the repairman would get this, and he would get the specific instructions on what to do on each job, and that was so much superior. And he told this to Rollard, and it never, it was just something he thought of while he was playing bridge. And then he came back and he told Mooney, "This is what I want." So I don't know how many people worked on that. I know I was one of the guys, and each guy failed. And we came up with some marvelous ideas on how to do it that were much more practical, some of which were later on incorporated. But we never knew the Rollard story.
Oh, gosh.
And since he'd already committed to exactly how this son of a bitch worked, and finally, the only way, Mooney was just going berserk, because by that time, the only way he'd get Truxell off his back, he figured, was if he screamed louder and beat us over the head even more vigorously, then we'd go out and invent something. And finally, what we did is I wrote a purchase order, and even he liked this idea. We wrote a purchase order and carried it down to manufacturing development and said, "Hey, we don't care how much it costs. We want you to develop this." And manufacturing development says it can't be done. And Truxell had temper tantrums about it. But, after we said, "Hey, you've been telling us how smart those people are down there," and that's finally how we got the black box shut down. But that was always, he never forgave us for that.
Really?
Yeah. And
so he and Slakta just didn't.
Well, they competed, and then Willie finally got promoted, and Rollard made him plant manager over at
Vauxhall.
Yeah.
Was that it?
Yeah, I was up in Liverpool, right outside of Liverpool. And I think the hardest thing that...
Well, Truxell up too.
Yeah, but he stayed around for a while. Then he went to MD. But, over in Liverpool, the hardest thing Willie ever had to learn how to do, he met the Queen. And he did real well for about a year over there. But he and his wife met the Queen, and his wife had to learn to curtsy. But Bill, one of a guy that I worked with manufacturing development, went over also to Vauxhall, and he told me afterwards what spelled the downfall over there. He told his people, in plant engineering, No overtime, no Saturday. Something came up, and they were trying to cut costs. So he just made a blanket rule of no overtime on weekends. So things that should have been repaired on a weekend, they were just shutting down. They were shutting the plant down. And the guy that was the overall head mogul from down in Vauxhall came up there, and he lasted about a year and a half. You know, because he actually terrified his plant engineering people, and the Englishman, they said, if that's the rule, then let the goddamn thing break down during the week. And the plant was constantly breaking down. And then he would blame it on Central Tooling that had been sent up there. Central Tooling would come up there and they'd win every fight with him. That's where his name was Stratton. Stratton told me that story. And that's why Willie finally got the hell out of there. Now, he did have an offer over there. This is going way astray. But there was a very rich mogul from Afghanistan. I never can pronounce that right. And he wanted Willie to build him a plant over there. And Willie gave him a figure. He said, to leave GM, he'd have to have this much a year. And the guy agreed to it. You know?
And Willie took it?
No.
No.
Willie thought about it for a long time, because he was in the process. That was about the time he lost his position over there, and he had to eat crow and come back and be a production manager at one of the GMAD plants. And of course, GMAD hated his guts for a long time because he'd been one of the big, fighters against GMAD. So he got really stranded for a long time, but he turned that one down. But so there was some.
Okay, so there was at least some competition between those two guys.
Oh yeah, and then of course the next thing we got into, because as part of final assembly, I also picked up tri-level shipping.
Okay.
And that was our next big venture into things that were invented by Goddard or his right-hand people. And that's when the Polish, Ed Cole's Polish garage came into existence.
Which was
a shipping device that had been invented by Ed Cole and a retired Bill Peoples, a retired vice president of Southern Pacific. And they had adjoining homes in California where Reagan lives. And on the weekend they invented this thing. And that was right after Ed Cole had already invented the, hanging up the Chevrolet Chevettes, was it?
Corvairs.
Corvairs, and hanging them up like bats. And later on, in our work with MD, we did find out, Ed Cole says you can do it without putting money in the frame. So they never told him that batteries cost 50 cents more, so they could be hung hung vertically that way. They put $3 in the frame and kept it from Ed, but they shipped them. Vertipack was used for during the life. Quite a few cars were shipped that way. And then he and Bill Peoples invented the Polish garage, 14,000-pound container that with 3 levels on it, open on one end, and you shove cars into it. You picked up the whole container then and put the opens 2 to a flat car, and you put them facing to one another, and then you shipped the cars that way. And then you had another device like that unloaded them at the railhead, and then you pulled them back out. Well, it was really hard on cars. It kept breaking frames.
Oh, did it?
Cadillac just went crazy. We had, and we, of course, said that was when we got sucked into it, because Cadillac couldn't make it work.
Had they started it?
Oh yes, they've been shipping for quite some time, working with Waller Succession and a bunch of people from MD, and we went down there. That was when John Belts was our VP. And we told him, we sat in a meeting with John and said, we just don't think, we've gone through the numbers and they don't add up. It isn't the right way to go. So John Belts, Ken Knight, myself went down and we sat across the table from Ed Cole. Now, very unique position for, you know, for a first level supervisor, and even Kendall was a little bit uncomfortable. And of course they had all the muckety mucks from MD there, and Ed Cole was, you know, he was looking at the latest ways that they had, and they tie down devices, the castings and whatnot, and he told them that they were using forgings, and he says, oh, you guys are dumb. And he spent the first part of the meeting redesigning the casting. He says, you got to make it out of his favorite material that he cast. What was it that he built the new plant up there?
Nodular iron.
Nodular iron, and he'd spent a lot of time. I couldn't believe that the president of General Motors was, but he knew he was the world's greatest engineer. And then Belt said we didn't really go along with the numbers. We didn't think the stack pack was the right way to go, and for these reasons. And
was the tri-level car out at that point?
No. There had never been nothing of
it.
This all preceded it, you know. And finally, I even made an impassioned plea to Cole. I says, for God's sakes, all we want is 90 days so we can see what we can come up with. And the head of manufacturing development says, oh, come on now. He said, you know, he says, we've invented everything there is down here. And we've looked at everything, and we've looked at all the possibilities. I says, well, you guys been wrong in the past, you know. And, you know, we just think we're a little bit smarter, and we know we're a rather independent bunch down here in Lansing. Give us 90 days. So in 90 days, we conceived and built, with the help of Whitehead and Kales in the Illinois Central, we built the first car. Now that's almost impossible to design a totally enclosed rail car like that. Conceive it, fund it. We didn't have to pay for it. The railroads, who didn't like stack pack, you know, they didn't like the Polish garage. They could see a lot of investments, and they didn't think it was going to work. So they went with us, and we built the first one. And we actually made a test shipment before we had the next meeting.
This was on a tri-level or a dual?
Totally, no, this was a totally enclosed, first one ever built. It's the first one ever built. And we went down there and we reported what tremendous success we'd had. We made a shipment up to Minneapolis, which was one of the rough tracks. We didn't have time to ship it all to Oakland. And I thought everyone in that room was going to get fired, because Ed Cole had temper tantrums.
Oh, really?
Oh, he had temper tantrums, you know, and because he knew that was the wrong way to go. And we had facts and figures, and that even, made it infuriated. And I thought he was going to fire Belts for spending the money.
Really?
And we said, well, didn't cost General Motors a cent, you know. Illinois Central and Whitehead and Kales, you know, they did the design work for free, and Illinois Central built the goddamn thing. Oh, okay. And
what could he say?
He couldn't really say a hell of a lot. He was still really angry. So he said, okay. And they very reluctantly, you know, because we had facts and figures, it was still better. Well, okay, and that meeting sort of ended in a draw, and he was going to go back. So what he did, it wasn't but a week later that Bob Truxell appeared on the scene. He had left as head of the tech center, and he moved into the job in charge of the old Bob Cook position, you know, that he had.
Materials management.
Yeah, he was the head man. And he was in charge of traffic, and he was also in charge of freight rates and everything else. And he came down there because he had been told by Kais, you know, change the fucking numbers, excuse me. And they went ahead and they redid the studies, and they proved the stack pack was cheaper. And of course we knew they were just cheating to beat hell. But you know, it was either that was his job, that was his why he came to, and so therefore, being head of shipping, he said, okay, we'll join. And so therefore we joined the crew. And that's when Frank and I, we built the loader, and we did all the experimentation, and we did most of the development work. And we'd have meetings down at the tech center, You know, and every time we'd get it, we'd think we have it licked, and we get a new set of frames that had to be welded together. All these Cadillacs that we were doing this on, and Oldsmobiles too. And then we'd bust the things all to hell. And then that's when Bud Hoffman joined the 100,000 Mile Club, because all he did was fly back and forth on to California first class, you know. And the flights he always took, there were very few people, and he'd play bridge with 3 stewardesses and have a hell of a good time. And so I thought the only thing that was really gratifying about all that was that we were told, we're getting out. Since we've proven it's the wrong way to go, we let the original Charlie's Polish Garage, we let it go. But by that time, American Motors had gotten very interested in it.
Okay,
and so
it's a closed car or something.
Yeah, it's the same car, you know, and they used it to ship American Motors cars in, and Chrysler got interested in it. And they both were test shipping in it. And then Ford finally got interested in it, but they had to do their own version, you know, it had to be a better idea. So they redesigned it, and they put some they did some things differently, and they made it different. And they spent a couple $1 million on their prototypes and whatnot. And about another year later, they standardized on a totally enclosed car that we had invented. And one of the reasons we kept getting shot down, and we even had a presentation where we said, well, what do? You can't, those things are too tall going the Eastern way. And we even had a slide where we depicted what we called Charlie's Topless Eastern, you know. And it was the whole thing, except you couldn't put a top on it.
Yeah, so it could just slip through the tunnel.
Yeah, and underneath the electric wires, because that's all electric out there. And then finally they built one for the other companies. And Ed Cole retired, and it was about a month after he retired, $25 million worth of guaranteed stuff from the railroads was scrapped out, quietly amortized.
All of the stack pack stuff.
All the stack pack stuff, and it was dismantled, and we went the other way. But we Oldsmobile beat Ed Cole, and if you have to understand Ed Cole when I was assembly coordinator during all of this, a lot of the times, every time we had a cutback, I would be back, and I would be final assembly supervisor, and I'd also be assembly. We could cut one engineer, and I would do that on my off days. And we used to tour all the different companies, all the different divisions, and have meetings there. And I'd always ask, they'd show something, they'd get a terrible look on their face, and this is over in there. This is one of our experimental things we're working on. And to get people to talk about it, I always used to ask the same thing. Was that invented by Jesus Christ? And that would be like opening the door. And they said, yes, that son of a bitch was here one weekend, or one week, and he made us a visit, and he told us, that's the latest thing you guys ought to invent. We have pissed away millions of dollars on it, and it didn't work. And that was true. Harrison Radiator had something up there. Every place we went to, they had. He'd been around.
Been everywhere.
Yeah, that was also about the time he and his son invented the Wankel. And we even toured that, all installed. And Tech Center just couldn't make the seals work. And they spent millions and millions. We saw all that equipment down there at the Tech Center. And, at Hydromatic.
$60 million.
Yeah. That was another one of his fiascos. But anyway, so we finally, Oldsmobile finally went out, and the whole world went our way on tri-level shipping. And we also got exposed at the end of that, just before the Cole retired. Truxell had us go down, and we had to work with International Husky, because Ed Cole was so shook that people weren't adapting that he had the C5A,
which is a great big airplane.
Yeah, the biggest one in the world, and we were going to ship cars in the C5A.
Oh, okay.
And then on the way back, they were going to ship lettuce in it.
Lettuce?
Yeah, lettuce and fruits from California, and And we worked with the same people at Waldsmobile Station, and that whole crew down there. They used to just shake their head, because even though International Husky was a private that was a private company.
Okay.
Tech Center did all the development work for them. I asked them, I said, where in the hell are you getting the money? And they said, shut up. Ed Cole was, still a power. And until he died. And as soon as he got out as president, the interest level went down.
Charles P. Guenther of 5607 West Maple Rapids Road, St. John's, Michigan. The recording was made by Jim Walkinshaw at the Oldsmobile History Center in Lansing on October 30th, 1990. This is tape number 2 of 3 tapes.
I guess to finish that whole thing with MD, we got exposed to a lot of other things down there. And one of the things we got exposed, that was about the time they invented the penny machine for the high-speed mail. And some executive, vice president or president, I think it was Ed Cole, told the mint people they really didn't know how to make a machine, and they had one that they could make 50,000 an hour. I was pennies. And Tech Center developed it, and we donated it. There was another one of those grandiose, spent all kinds of money. And
Really?
and
You made a
donated.
machine and
Yeah.
gave it to the mint?
Yeah. And the other famous one that a lot of people don't, Roger Keyes had a place up north by Traverse City, and he hated these cars. Up north, every farmer up there has at least 6 cars out there that he can select and take parts off of to keep his cars running, and he hated those. So Roger was running the Tech Center at that time. That was under his jurisdiction as a vice president. And they invented a portable crusher, car crusher, and this happened. They went in and they paid fabulous prices to crush cars. And they went right out to the farmers around Kaiser's cottage up there, and they went through that whole area and offered them fabulous prices so they could try out their portable crusher and get rid of them. That was another one of those famous boondoggles. I don't think people really ever realized just how much of that went on at the Tech Center. And we were fighting Ed Cole on Stack Pack. We were getting ready for another meeting to show how it wasn't working. The head of MD, and I can't remember his name at the time, he says, intelligence is sort of inversely proportional to the distance from the 14th floor. And he says, hey, we're too close to the 14th floor. And they tell us the right answers. And if they don't, and if we tell them that they're wrong, then you're fired, and somebody else is hired in who agrees and says, yes, Ed,
That's the right answer.
that's the right answer, And our jobs are to make his inventions and any of the bright ideas, make them true. So that was sort of...
Well, that was an era.
That was an era.
Yeah, it was punctuated by Ed Cole.
And then we had the Way Out Committee that was another one of my crazy assignments.
The Way Out Committee?
Yeah, the Way Out Committee.
Okay.
They took people. It was sponsored by GMAD, and Chuck Katko was sort of the committee chairman. And we had to come up with way out approaches on how to build a car. And of course, GMAD at that time they were slowly trying to take over all of the home car divisions, and we had battle after battle after battle because they knew everything. And Chuck Katko would sit in the meetings and, no, you can't be negative. You can't be negative. And they always said, well, now what's Oldsmobile's idea? And I didn't know what. I went around, I talked to product, and I talked to everybody. They said, "Oh, Charlie, go away, go away. You invent something." So we did. I invented my own thing, and I went around and I asked, I asked the assistant chief engineer over at product, "Is this possible?" And, "Yeah, sure, why not? We'll work with Diener." And Diener and I, we developed a concept. We were going to have a high-speed, we were going to build bodies and ship them separately. And then we'd send them to a high-speed processing line where we built 200 chassis an hour, and then they just put them together.
Plug in, sort of.
Sort of plug in. And the concept was even, the one that Catco, he really had a difficult time not being negative. And he put it in the back of the book, and he said, "Well, you can't do that." I said, "Why can't you do that?" I said, because in the diagram, I said, you build a basic chassis, and then you have different body styles that fit on the same chassis. And if you go into a repair, you go in, and if there's something wrong with your chassis, they just put a different chassis underneath it, and the dealer keeps it, and off it goes. And I said, and if you want to, in the summertime, you keep another body out there, and you put a convertible on there, and the convertible is really a jazzy roadster, and it's built by Lamborghini, and it's shipped from Italy, and it's shipped all the way over here. And that's when he said, "You got to be nuts! You can't do that." Of course, later on, I think that's how they actually do the Elante. The Elante is actually done like that. And the fact that the car divisions would become high-speed, that you would do the chassis operations, and you would really mechanize everything, and everything would be totally automated.
Yeah.
And you could run 200 an hour, and I said, you guys can't possibly, you build 60, 75 an hour. You always said 60 was maximum, and since Oldsmobile ran 110, and you took us over, we were shut down. Ed Cole also said you can't build that fast. 60 an hour is a right line speed. And we had all those fight with Ed Cole. That's another one that when we were back in processing, when he finally took over and became our president, he came in and told Wolfram, we were running one shift, 110 an hour. Can't do that. That's crazy. Only one line speed you build them at, and that's 60 an hour. That's the right speed. And he gave Wolfram he chewed his ass out I don't know how many times, and finally he didn't ask anymore because we made study after study, and finally, we were converted to a 60 an hour plant.
Did we basically get edicted into that?
Oh, edicted, yeah. Everybody was threatened, even though the vice president was told, if you don't do this, you're canned. And then slowly, we ran that thing, and we ran it all the way back up to slowly to 96 an hour. Mm-hmm. And they said you couldn't do that. But at least the efforts that we made at all the other plants then came in at 75 or 80. Mm-hmm. And, but once again, it was because we proved that the people were nuts. Yeah. And so there were lots of interesting things that way. Shut it off for a minute. I have to... during this period of time, they started a maker-purchase group. Okay. And Don Downey became maker-purchase.
Was that the first one?
He was the first one.
First maker-purchase.
First maker-purchase.
About when would that, can you get a time frame, more or less, Charlie?
Probably 58, somewhere in there. I was still process engineer at that time. May have been 57. Mm-hmm. And so Downey became the maker-purchase guy, and I was still processing. And then Mooney got promoted somewhere along in there, and Downey got another job, and I can't remember for sure whether he became the head. I think he became head of the processing group.
Okay.
And he was about as well qualified as Mooney was for that,
How come we had all these good qualified guys in this job?
Well, because in those days, I guess it was how you made presentations that qualified you for a processing supervisor instead of the other. Okay. And at least later on, it was a combination of the two. You had to know something about it. And
okay. So Mooney left and Downey went out of MOP into his job?
Yeah,
Is that kind of what happened?
and I became maker purchase coordinator.
All right.
And it was totally different than what Downey had been doing, but we got into some really good things.
What was the maker purchases job, basically, Charlie?
Bring work into Oldsmobile and, keep Fisher from stealing stuff from us, because they were always trying to do that. They were always trying to take sheet metal away and taking the cowl vent grill and making that stamping over there. And the other divisions were always trying to steal work that we did.
Okay.
And so we tried to steal work from the other. We went in the other direction. We were trying to take stuff and work. We had open capacity, and instead of other people buying equipment and buying things that we could already make for them on existing equipment, we went ahead and did that.
Okay. At that point in time, there was no coordination between divisions at all, basically.
No, it was catch as catch can.
Everybody was out on their own.
Yeah, and in fact, I went to the early meetings. They finally put a committee together somewheres in there, and where Buick, Olds, Pontiac, and Chevrolet, and Bill Detloff was the representative from Chevrolet, and that was my first exposure to Chevrolet. And the first thing they said, don't look at anything we make. If you want us to make something for you, fine. But don't even cross that goddamn line, because we can beat you at anything, And it took some real we really beat on Detloff's head a while, and let him know that, that we did some pretty good work too. And that got into some real interesting meetings, because then we would have, when we got into the first standardized car, where we shared a body.
The 61, the little F-85?
No, it wasn't the F-85 so much. That was the next one beyond that.
It must have been the 64.
The 64A car.
Yeah.
Was the first that we really got into. That 61 was a divvy-up job, and I think that was divvied up between Buick and ourselves. Mostly.
Yeah.
And Don Taylor was the Bob Rollis of Buick. And we used to get together. We had a lot of meetings in those days, and I used to go with Rollis. And I always remember the one trip to Pontiac one day. It was Rollis and I and Elmer, John Elmer, because he was our sales rep. And
J. Elmer Fuller.
Yeah, and it was the only year I guess the way you can find out what year that was is we were going down there, and we were in a 98 sports car. It was a 98 Starfire.
Okay.
Do you remember that? It wasn't called a Starfire, but it had bucket seats and all that.
Yeah.
And the winding roads on 59, all of a sudden the accelerator sticks and it keeps accelerating. We're in the curves, and Elmer and I did a great big shit, this is it.
Driver.
Rollis liked to drive those things. And he just casually reached down, turned off the ignition, and he had to hit the brakes real hard and steer real hard. But, and then he called somebody up and says, come get this son of a bitch and find out what happened. Because we would have been dead if he hadn't have done that. Because he was driving fast because we were late for the meeting anyway. And, but Don Taylor and Rollis worked very well together, and they actually made some decisions that made them unpopular at home.
Okay.
But Pontiac was, that was when all of this was going on, and we had the terrible fights with Pontiac when they stole when we got out of it. We went to a Salisbury axle, and we had the banjo, and Ray Burns and I worked together. That was all part of the Maker-Purchase Act activity, was to defend that sort of thing.
Okay.
And Pontiac just plain lied. And we went down there. Harold Knisley was the guy that headed up that activity. Well, he was a big muckety-muck and head of layout and several other things. And Knisley deliberately provoked. He insulted Ray Burns and I, and whoever else was with us. I can't remember who that was. Because we were supposed to go down there and look to see how they were making things. and because their routings were wrong, they lied on everything on their costs, and he wasn't going to show it to us, and he deliberately baited us because he wanted us to tell him to go fuck himself, and Burns and I, we gritted our teeth and we waded through it, and we went out and looked at things, and but that was another one of those where they just plain cheated. And and then Chevrolet cheated. Gale Price never forgave them for it. He says Chevrolet's prices, because they stole the steering knuckle business away from us at that time. And he says they're $3.30 low per car, and they're just plain cheating. And we didn't have an engineering change for a long time. And he says, guess what? We got an engineering change. Guess what it cost? $3.31. They got their money back. It was about a year and a half after we went to that new style, because we knew it couldn't. The Salisbury couldn't be that good, because we went while we were down looking at Ford and looking at how to make Salisbury axles. The same people came to our place to see how to make banjos, because they said we think these are cheaper and we're going to go that way. But see, Ed Cole once again played in that one. He wanted to make all of that stuff out of nodular iron back here.
Because he had a nice home or something.
Yeah. Well, he had just built the damn thing and he didn't need it. And they built the nodular iron plant, and so he helped change the numbers, and we lost the business, and we went out of the banjo axle business. Yeah. So that was. And maker purchase probably was, to me, was always one of the most exciting things to be in. And I almost got fired in there too, because forging plant was going down the tubes. They couldn't compete. And I said, why can't you do? Nobody else had done this. I'd read about Concast in Europe. And I says, what you do is you change, the accounting procedure. I says, they lose their shirts over there. If it were a plastic machine, you'd make the part, you take the scrap, you put it right back in and you grind it up, so you only count what you use. Right. Now do the same thing with Concast, and you make crankshafts that way. And Bill Martin and I, he liked the idea, and we worked on it. And Ken Knight, finally, he'd catch me working at it. And I was already doing it on my spare time. And Ken Knight says, the next goddamn time I catch you working on Concast, he says, you're fired. Okay. And a week later, Truxell called me up. He said, you once said you could save $10 a crank. I said, yeah. I said, but I can't talk to you about that. Why not? Because Ken Knight says that he's going to fire me if I mention it. I'll handle that. I'll take care of that. So Ken Knight, we went over there and we discussed it. And I told him my ideas and how what Bill's ideas were. And Truxell got interested, and that's how we got Scrap You. Yeah, that would have worked, but unfortunately, we'd already lost the crankshaft. Once again, the guy that was playing the games was Ed Cole, because they were nodular cranks, and so nodular cranks were already committed. And if Truxell had gotten interested in that 6 months sooner, I think we could have beaten Ed Cole in that one, because a lot of people afterwards said that really nodular crank had to be so much bigger. And it almost came back. Forged cranks almost came back when we first started taking the BBs out of the car to try to lighten them up. And people would really have liked to have had a forged crank.
Yeah, or that's more strength.
Because you can, the weight just goes down humongously. But it was too late. Nodular iron plant had been built, and Ed Cole had decreed, he had proven on paper through his accountants that was the right way to go. And so unfortunately, Scrap You almost made it over there. The only thing that ruined it over there is that you have to bite the bullet when scrap prices go down. You don't make money. Yeah. But when the scrap prices go up, then it's a real money maker. Yeah. And I guess we're finding that out just like today in oil. you know, you can't have synthetic fuels when the price of gasoline is, you know, but you sure would like to have synthetic fuels when it's when it's $34 a barrel.
Right.
So, so we had all kinds of interesting things in Maker Purchase that went on that way.
See, Maker Purchase, you also had a guy working with you, did you, Charlie?
No.
Beside you, or
No,
were you all by
I was
yourself
the
at that
man.
time?
I was the main man,
Okay.
and
Durbin didn't exist.
oh, as a clerk, yeah,
Okay.
yeah, he was.
So you had
he,
him
yeah.
to help
In
with.
fact, that's where I got into the releasing systems, because by that time, Dick Hill had gone over to product, and he invented the new releasing system, and then we had to put out the Maker Purchase report, and then we had a guy by the name of Mr. Leisman who kept saying, this column, I don't need it. We haven't got room for that. So they don't really need that. And then he would, without telling the soul, he would simply remove a column, and then people would say, Charlie, you haven't got, what's wrong with your goddamn report? I'd say, well, isn't that there? No, it's gone. You know, Bill Haight would get me on the line. You know, he was head of purchasing, and he and his sidekick, who later became, the two of them always had me outnumbered. They'd get on the squawk box, which in those days was very hard to understand on the phone. Well, Radke and Haight would get on the line together, and sometimes Van Ness would be there too, because he was under, at that time he was one level lower. Now three of them would chew on my ass, you know, and I'd say, Dale, what happened? He said, I don't know either. It hasn't been here since Monday. And we go over and ask Floyd, and after a while we are, you know, Floyd, you son of a bitch, why didn't you well, you didn't need that. I knew that. You know, just like his, you know, it was just like he did with reviews. When Floyd used to, in fact, he finally admitted there were a couple of reviews that he gave with nobody sitting there.
That he didn't get.
Then he signed their names and everything. And but in the process, I became very, very heavily involved in the release system.
Okay.
And Mooney always said if there's a problem, you know, they had a meeting, send Charlie. And so even though I never really had much to do with data processing, I became part of the major planning group that you know, really decided how the whole releasing system all the way through, and material control in those days, there was no Duffy.
Yeah.
Well, Duffy was one of the program, you know, was one of the, and so therefore we did Duffy's, we did material handling's work, and we did material handling's work, and we did a lot of the work with material control, because we had broadcast, and broadcast was directly related to releases. So that whole system, you know, there was another one of those functions that I did for many, many years. It was minister without portfolio. And
But did you guys then in MOP look at every part?
every part, see, every release. A lot of people didn't realize every part was released, and Dick Hill would release it, and the next morning we would have the releases, and then we would fill in the answers to all the parts as to what they were going, how they were going to be handled.
Whether you're going to make it or buy it.
Yeah, make her to buy it, and buy it list prime, or because you know we even got into whether do we prime it, do we, you know, do we heat treat it? There was a lot of things a lot of people didn't realize. We had to work with the lab, we had to work with the paint people.
Now, when Downey was there, Charlie, was that kind of approach, looking at all parts going on, or was that a thing that?
Yeah, that sort of started with him, but it really got much bigger, and Dale was already working for Downey, and I just took that over, and then it grew and grew and grew and grew, and no, Downey already, you know, Downey did it. He'd set it up, yeah, he'd set it up, and we just got into a lot more things, and as we expanded, we got into more and more committees, and did a lot more things. Like gas tanks came up, and that's when we got in with Wolfram, and that was probably my only exposure. I used to have maker purchase meetings and went up to all the way up to Wolfram's level, and talk about the meetings could only resemble one thing. I don't know if you probably never attended a Wolfram meeting in his little room over there, because there was a gold chair up there on his right-hand side facing the rest of the crowd, and that was always occupied with our button-down comptroller.
Earl Schoen.
Earl Schoen sat there, and then all of the department heads were out there in front. Bill Hay.
They were all sitting just around the table.
No. They sat out there it was like Bismarck would run it was just like a military tribunal.
Oh, really?
Oh, yeah.
Just kind of then in rows.
In rows, yeah.
Oh my goodness.
And Bill Haight would always have all of his black books there, and it was really terrible, because Wolfram always used the same technique, and you could and the guy over here on the right, there was Schoen sitting there very prim and proper, and Belts is over here, and Belts always in those meetings had to have his nail clippers out, and you could hear the clippity clip 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 clip, yeah. And Wolfram would ask Bill Haight a question, and he couldn't remember everything verbatim. He had a big book like that, and he'd be looking up, and he would start to look up the answer, and he was pretty fast in getting the answer, but before he could get the answer out, Wolfram would ask him a second question, and then he'd go to look up the second answer, and then he'd go back and he asked Bill what the hell the answer to the first question was, and then by that time Bill had lost it, and he'd be a babbling idiot. And Bill and I had many conversations when he used to talk about Wolfram. He told me that he finally had to sleep by himself, because he would moan and grind his teeth at night, and his wife couldn't sleep because he'd go on all night.
Wolfram was driving him nuts.
That's right. And Rollis had to watch himself too, because Wolfram he was a very difficult. The only guy that was completely relaxed in that whole thing was Belts, and he'd give flippant answers to Wolfram, and sometimes the meetings would get to the point where the maker-purchase coordinator would have to sit outside the door.
Oh, it got that bad?
Yeah, it got
they
that
would actually
bad.
Ask you to leave?
I'd sit outside the door, and they'll say, well, we'll call you back in if we need an answer.
Oh,
they were beyond belief. And
who would they have in there, Charlie? Basically the staff?
The staff and the directors, the Truxels would, and the performers. And I don't think I'd ever seen anything like that. I've been to staff
And that was
meetings.
basically in Wolfram's office.
He had a little, over there was an old building, 66, and there was a little conference room over there.
Outside of his office.
Yeah, yeah. And people would wait outside the door, and they would be asking. That was beyond belief. But and we had a lot of fights with other divisions, and we won a lot of fights. And one of the things we won, we got to make all the gas tanks. We didn't steal Chevrolet's portion of it, but we didn't let Chevrolet make ours either. But we made them for Buick, Olds, and Pontiac. And there were some meetings that we attended down there when they were divvying up, and the vice president sat down together. And Pete Estes was the head of Pontiac at that time, and I can always remember him getting up, and he was as flippant, he was worse than Belts.
Really?
He really was, And I always remember the way he described. He says, he says, whenever you get in bed and you buy some of these parts from Chevrolet, he says, they're so goddamn cheap. He says, the money you can hear the tinkle, tinkle, tinkle as it goes in your pocket, And so there was a lot of activity there in that program where they divvied up these things, and there was some really bloody infighting as to who got to make what. And that really, it was that constant struggle to keep Oldsmobile as a manufacturing facility.
Really?
Yeah, a lot more than a lot of people believed. And
did that go on was that what precipitated the MOP bunch initially, maybe?
No. The MOP bunch started before that. And there might have been, I remember, no, I guess that was we divvied up The Brown book. The Brown book was the one they did on the F-85, and I already had that at that time. Yeah, that was 61, and I already had maker purchase at that time. Because we had to go through the book and pick out what we were going to try to make and whatnot, and I had to deliver that book to the company picnic. I had to work until noon and pick up my wife, and I delivered to Murphy at 1:30 in the afternoon at the picnic. And because that was really a struggle to see who in the hell was going to. That's when the first divvying up started. And prior to that, we had maker purchase.
Yeah, but
Prior to that, it was to steal from the other divisions and bring more work in. Because people had begun to learn that, you know, the name of the game, Chevrolet had always played this game real well, and they made a hell of a lot more. And we tried to go after lots of different kinds of things. We went after brackets, muffler brackets, and we filled up the basement of, you know, over there. We made a lot of those with the rubber assemblies and whatnot. We changed. We even got the gas tank over there and put.
Got it into final assembly?
Yeah, we put it in the burden center where we could compete. We got it out of the expensive, you know, out of the engine plant.
Better labor rate, or better burden rate.
Better burden rates, you know, so we played that game. A lot of people said, well, that's stupid. That's the way the game is played. And you know, if you were over in the engine plant, that was, you know, you just got, it was, you got hurt on the comparisons. So that whole period in there was, a lot of people never realized how much competition there was. Fisher and GMAD fighting with one another as to where do they made the parts, and Fisher's trying to steal parts from us, and they always wanted to, well, the kinds of things. The big struggle we had was always over the air conditioning unit. They wanted to take over the entire IP, but there would have been an $8 penalty to do that, and a lot of this whole triple markup thing. They wanted to, at one time, somebody got the bright idea in Detroit that they, instead of us cutting keys in the plants, they would come pre-made from Rochester, and Rochester would sell them to, let's see, they'd go from Rochester to Turnstead to Fisher, and then Fisher to us. That added up, I think it was between 50 cents and $1 a car.
Just in markup?
Just in markup, you know? And then the Ed votes would have to sit there, and Ed Vogt always told us the same thing. Now, he didn't believe this, but he had to. He said, that's corporate profit. Yeah, I know. I said, who do we work for? Oldsmobile. I said, forget that. Is there any advantage in doing it the other way? No. And I said, if, all we do is wind up with a more expensive car. And as I used to try to explain to the foreman, that if the car is more expensive and you got to put it out at a certain level, you take $1 away, then that means the $1's got to come out, and something else that's standard on the car now becomes an accessory, because your base car has got to come in at a certain level. It was very hard for people to understand, but that's really the way it worked. And we got into some real fights over that. And I think one of the things when Mr. Elliott was in the ball game.
Comptroller.
He was comptroller. And
he came after Schroeder.
Yeah, and Vogt was still there, I believe. And we went over there and we were talking about Fisher Body. And somebody had said, well, if you do all these things, you almost, the only way you can really figure out all of these things, you have to come up with a body price. And then you have to break it down with so much for so much for material. And so we couldn't get anybody to give us any numbers, because the accounting had been told if anybody leaks this stuff, you'll be fired. That was only kept, Ed Vogt was the only one who, the top people were the only ones who get to look at that. And so we had a meeting, and we sat down, and Ron Kelly on a Saturday, we finally looked at each other, and I told Ron, I says, look, let's just do this. We'll just guess. Well, guess how much, how much do you think the plastic parts weigh? How much metal do you think is in there? And we start guessing, and we came up with the price of the body,
Yeah.
and a complete breakdown, labor, material, and all the rest of this stuff. And Elliot says, He says, how close is that? And they didn't want to say in front of us because we had guessed real close.
Got in the ballpark.
And we not only that, but all our subtitles were all real close.
Yeah.
And they had a witch hunt over there.
Oh, really? Because they thought you stole it?
They thought we had gotten that. The only way, because they told us afterwards, they told, some of the guys told Kelly, who was my senior engineer working for me, and he said, only way you guys could have gotten that, somebody gave you those numbers. And Ron and I said, hey, we sat in a goddamn office, and when if you've got Mooney screaming at you on one end saying, give me the numbers, we just put some numbers together, and just because we guessed real close. And they never did believe that. They never believed that. But, see, when you got into cars and you start talking about giving away sheet metal and, some of these things that were trying to be edicted by Godfrey, and we had a lot of that where, they wanted the assembly coordinators to simply say, this is the right place to do that. And
You mean with no data, just...
well, that's right. And D. Pietro used to be the assembly coordinator, or he was the GMAD assembly coordinator's boss, and he would have meetings with Godfrey, and Godfrey would give him little notes and say, implement this. And I was chairman of the assembly coordinators at the time, and we would take a stance, and DePietro would have temper tantrums. And he says, well, Godfrey told me this is the way it's going to be. I said, wait a minute now. Let's have votes here. Chevrolet, do you agree with that? Godfrey would say, I don't agree with that. Buick, Olds, Pontiac, And we'd come up and we'd say, and I'd write the minutes, and we'd say, this was discussed, and this is the decision. And we'd have some compromise position that would protect us and do it the right way. And then DePietro would have to go back, and Godfrey just had temper tantrums over that. Well, once again, it was power politics. And even later on, Frank and I used to go down and visit with the guys, what were the brothers' names? That one hand ran plant engineering, the other was a big muckety-muck, Ed Fisher. And we do studies on where should the IP be assembled. And we had many fights over that. And finally, when we got into some of that, and Godfrey became, when we lost control and they took over everything, and they made some of those decisions at those levels, and sheet metal just moved over, and they were going to install it. And at least we had one good thing. We found out that they were going to have to buy a building over there. So a lot of people hated me, but we stole cushion. That's when we cushion assembly over there, and eliminated the need for the building over there. And Buckmaster almost got fired for that, because see, a lot of people don't realize just all the politics that went into some of those major decisions that way, and nobody wanted to look at real cost, and it was just. Let's take a break. Just the next thing we'll talk about is a new assembly plant.
Okay. Back up just a second, if you would, Charlie. How long were you in the MOP thing?
Until January of '66, I think it was. That's when I became a supervisor.
That's when you went to be the supervisor of the assembly group.
We could talk about Jim Logan if you wanted some interesting insight to Jim Logan. He was my last supervisor as a make-a-purchase clerk.
Okay. He was then in
that's what
methods bunch.
He was a methods bunch, and he was a supervisor. We had a very interesting group at that time, because there was Dick Hahn, Don Seif, Mel Hammond, and the immortal Jim Apple. working for Jim. And Jim never had time to do anything that he was supposed to do. So we finally took all of his work away from him. We did his overtime schedules. We did his foreman reviews. He had nothing to do with anything that had to do with his job.
How could you do that?
We just did it because he always caught hell for everything, and Mooney was, it was just unmerciful, and so therefore, we let him play. He did the big make or purchase thing on the axle to get the differential plant back in, and he sort of played with that. And his other love of his life was this big chart, because he said once and for all he was going to organize my work for me.
For you?
For me, and he was going to show me how, because I was always behind, and I always worked a lot of overtime. Yeah. And he got that big chart in there with all the strings that he pulled out in all the different projects, and he spent a month organizing my work. And I had 49 different projects I was working on, and he got them all in there, and he prioritized them. And he says, Monday, we're going to start using this board, and you'll know exactly what the hell to do. And Monday, we had 3 telephone calls on 3 subjects that were not on that board, and we dropped everything else. And the very first day, we destroyed his board. He says, but, we can't do this, And he wanted to tell the people on the phone that that won't come up for a month. And it was higher management, the Moonies and the Knights, and hey Jim, ain't the way the game is played, This is what's going on today, and we scrapped everything else. He never did say another word about that goddamn board.
Where did this big chart end up?
It stayed on his wall, but he never used it. I don't know. I think it finally got thrown out. But we made a pact between Hahn and everybody else. We said, look, Logan, because he really was he was slipping, and in the opinion of, and he would just it was almost devastating. We felt sorry for him, and we hated him, but we felt sorry for him because he would just be crucified at meetings. And we said, well, the only way we can get rid of him is to get him promoted. And to get him promoted, we have to do outstanding things, and everything has to be, after all, he's our boss. So we'll build the boat, we'll build the engine, we'll run it, and we'll do all of his goddamn work, and we'll get him out of trouble. And he didn't quite get out of trouble, but he did finally get promoted. And Hahn and we just did. He never knew. He never got the schedule for all the foremen that were going to come. He never looked at anything. He had nothing to do with that. We took over suggestions. We kept him up to date on that. The only thing we couldn't keep him up to date on is reviews, and he got in trouble with Knight on those.
Always late.
Always late. But I guess the biggest make-or purchase at that time that we played with all of those years was the new assembly plant. And so a lot of the presentations that came out we made as part of make or purchase to build a new assembly plant.
Rather than coming out of the assembly process bunch.
Process bunch. Well, later on, after I became process, after I got out of make or purchase, then we did some of those things.
You took that stuff with you.
Yeah, I took that thing with it, yeah. And it lasted for many, many years. And then when we finally sold it, it got approved. And I'd worked all those years on it. That's when I got very angry. And my group got very angry, because then they decided to put an elite group together, which Larry Kerr was the head. And they got to work all those, they just worked whatever hours they wanted to. They had nothing else to do. And for 2 years, I think it was almost 2 years. 2 years, and and they were building the plant. And then we had the Arabs shut off the oil, and then everything went to hell, and we ran out of money, and they shut her all down.
Well, what happened? What was all the stuff that preceded that, Charlie? How did that? Can you remember how it got started?
You mean? Well, they had everything was done by committee.
In the corporation, you mean, or at Oldsmobile?
Well, no, are you talking now about the new assembly plant?
Yeah. How did the new assembly plant? You started way early before.
No, well, we go down there with appropriation requests for new buildings, and I guess during that period of time we built, we first added on. We got rid of the paint plant. We built a new paint plant, and all those were, we had to go down and get money and get those approved.
Yeah.
And then there was the Tornado plant, which once again was a separate deal. I didn't work on that so much; somebody else did. And but then we finally kept going for the new assembly plant. So
But was somebody like Mooney asking or pushing, or was
yeah. Well, I mean, whoever was sitting over there in Building 66 or Building 70, we kept making proposals to try to sell the concept of building, because we figured it was either build a new one here or we were going to go down the poop chute and go out of business. And so we did that for many, many years, and finally we got the money.
Okay. But it took a good many years to
Oh.
do that.
I think if you took all the proposals, I think we made a proposal twice a year, and I think it lasted something like 15 years. Well, I can tell you how long it lasted. It lasted from 66, and we made a lot before then. We did a lot of one-shift, two-shift studies when we were still in the processing group, and I guess 61. We finally got the F-85 line, and we built those. I'm a little bit fuzzy right in that period of time. I was more over, and I think in make or purchase, and I didn't. But then we got back into it hot and heavy to try to get a better facility. And I guess I can't remember what the time frames were for building on to final assembly and building the last two conveyors. We added onto the building over there, and we put in that new line over there.
You're talking in the old plant.
In the old plant,
yeah.
And we kept adding on the visualiners out on the end. The towing machines were moved out at the end there. So that was all. That's slowly. We used to do everything, and then we built. First thing,
got built
well, before then we built the, Rallis always wanted he wanted to get the work that was being done underneath the bridge in the cold, and that's when we built 146.
146, yeah,
we built 146, the big shed, and then we ran things into 146 and did the repair out there for a while, and then finally we built 150.
See, all that must have been kind of in the 60s when we were doing most of that crap.
Yeah, it was. Each year we did a little bit more, and we kept encroaching, getting further out, and that was another time that Frank Fowler and I almost got fired because, I said, Frank, down at you're going to have to almost put fill in there at 150. That's all space. We could have space, and we could have basement down there. Oh, no. And we talked a little bit about it to Mooney. Mooney says, I don't have money in the project for that. and so finally at a meeting, we said in front of Truxell, I don't know which one of us leaked it, Frank or I. We made some mention, well, it's too bad we don't use that space down there, because, boy, we could get that for a third of the price of what you normally get space for. Truxell said, Mooney, you didn't tell me that. Oh. And so Truxell not only did the first half, which we proposed, he went all the way to the street and built that whole thing. And he told Mooney, well, figure out, get the money somewhere.
You cover it.
And Mooney was so goddamn mad. He threatened to fire Frank and I. He says, you knew you weren't supposed to mention that. But I really paid off. And we built it, and that space underneath there was cheap, and it was quite usable, and it's been used successfully for a lot of things. And, there were some other interesting, I guess to follow the theme for the new assembly plant, we finally got the money, and then they set up the Kerr team, and then it got grounded. And when finally they wanted to get permission to finish it, the first thing Mooney said, we're not going to do it like the last time. Because he said it was like a camel that was, a camel is a horse that was invented by committee. And nobody liked it. Nobody liked it. And yet they had the tower in the center, and which they later tore out. And that's when they said, Charlie, you and Frank can do this, and we'll give you 2 engineers. I said, wait a minute. We're going to keep all the work we have today, and I get 2 engineers, and we get to do that and hold down the overtime. Yeah, maybe later on we'll give you 1 more when you get ready to buy. Tom Rasmussen can come over, but he's busy, right? Not Rasmussen.
Quazor.
No. Vanderplas.
Vanderplas.
Tom Vanderplas can come over. So I said, okay. So we started all over again. And of course, a lot of it, the concrete was there.
The building had been designed.
That's right, and it didn't fit, and then nobody liked it. And we went through there and we did it all over again. And we had to compromise here and there because it was too far along. And then we invented the 18 an hour thing. I sold that, and that probably was the best thing we ever did.
What's the 18 an hour thing?
Well, we were going to be done early, and I said, well, let's just build some extra bodies, and we will build and we will run at 18 an hour over there, and we'll try the entire new facility out at 18 an hour.
Okay.
And we can come up to speed at 18 an hour, and we can run all summer, and we can actually build cars in there. Well, people thought that's not a bad idea. And so we were able to take all the kinks out and really debug it. And then when we accelerated in the fall, we had one problem that you owned, and that was that automatic frame loader down there that you had to have somebody sit on. But everything else, the merge, COPS merge, and everything worked beautifully because it had been pretty well tested. So really it was a nice way of doing business.
Was that kind of the first time we had tried an approach like that?
Yeah, it was brand new.
Kind of early piloting?
Early production.
Early production.
They had always done early pilots, but they already really built it. They didn't build them in the facility.
Yeah.
This was one of those rare cases where all you had to do is steal some production off the others. And the material, there were a lot of complications that people never realized. Broadcast, and how do you broadcast a separate system, and how do you, the bodies coming over, how do you sort those things, and then how do you explode the material so that a certain portion goes over to the other and a certain portion goes to here. That was really the headaches that came out of it. But it also let us try out the receiving systems and whatnot. And that was also about the same time when we tried out some of the new receiving systems, because and I don't know how much of this you remember, the first attempt for industrial engineering to come up with a receiving system was an infamous invention. Well, let's see. I guess we'll put Dale Daly name to that. It was the Kimball system, and that was when he still worked for Leisman. And the Kimball system was so successful, it almost destroyed people. And then...
That was to use a little tag or something.
Yeah, like they do in department stores, punch. And that never worked worth a damn. So they decided...
But this was an attempt to get us into
the only reason we got into all of that, because we wanted to make a better car, and we wanted to have better control, and the only way to do that, the foreman spent all of his time chasing stock.
This was a case of having plenty of stock on hand.
Yeah, because
usually.
Well, they could never find it. They didn't know how much they had in the house, and they never knew how much where it was, So Kelly and I, we invented the other system, the new receiving system, and Kelly was told by Ken Knight, in no uncertain terms, he says, well, you fucked it up the first time. He says, if you don't get it right this time, you're fired. Kelly's, and Ken left before we could rebuttal and said, we didn't invent the first one. That wasn't ours. That was that goddamn Leisman group that did that, But Ken Knight didn't remember it that way. And that's when we invented that whole other system.
And this was, however, long before anybody had ever heard of just-in-time and all that stuff.
Oh, yeah. Because all this is a modern, state-of-the-art receiving system with its own mini computer or with its own big computer, and every receiving system inputting it, where it was received at the dock, and they had the computers, and they put tickets on it, and then when it moved across the bridge, out of storage and on over the lines, they put it in, and it kept track of everything. And they used that for many, 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 many years. And that really had some interesting anecdotes, because that's when I got caught again. I almost got fired for that, too. We had a guy that, we had summer engineering students, and in those days, there really wasn't a follow-up system for when they all went out the door in the fall. And I knew that. And we had just implemented this system, and we had this one guy that was really good, and it worked, he was really good on the computer end of the business. And so that was when Fickeyes was director. And so to cover that, because, the people out there, the mentality of the people, and the truck drivers were now having to input and receiving things, and they just didn't know how to do it. And they weren't ready to take it on their own. So we decided we'd keep this guy, and we just wouldn't let him go. And we kept him all fall. And then it got close to Christmas, and he was still working. And finally, they had an operating meeting in January. And somebody asking her, how's the new receiving system doing, I think. And Fickeyes was there. Oh, material, before he could even answer, material handling says, it's great. Are you getting the proper support out of industrial engineering at night on the night shift? Oh, absolutely. Well, and Fickeyes is saying, I don't have anybody on the night shift. And they said, well, who covers it on the night shift? Mr. Nobody. And Mr. Nobody, yeah, Mr. Nobody. And so what we had done, we actually, and the people thought that was his name. We got him, and we said, now you tell everybody your name is Mr. Nobody. And so Fickeyes came from the meeting and called me in. He says, Charlie, you son of a bitch, who in the hell is Mr. Nobody? Mr. Nobody? I don't know anything about Mr. Nobody. Well, he says, well, this is one of these rare times. He says, I got all kinds of compliments on what a fabulous job my Mr. Nobody is doing on a night shift. I said, oh, shit, okay. And I explained to him that, that he was a student, and we just kept him, and nobody closed him out.
He was going school days and working nights.
Yeah. And then it worked out well for him. And after that, they developed a system so that everybody was checked out by Helen as they left, that they had to leave. Another one of mine. But there were lots of interesting things like that. Like we all, every time Hoffman would have a heart attack, we would have to replace him we couldn't replace him for 6 months. And now this part shouldn't go too far. Peyton Fuller was the first one. He was the colored soccer coach who was doing his PhD in fluid mechanics out of Michigan State, and he took Bud's place. And Peyton was very good. And Bud had another heart attack about a year and a half later, and we got Peyton Fuller again. And Peyton got very good at that. And we wrote him up and gave him rave notices and whatnot. And then he went over to product, and they hired him over there. And then all at once, here comes the chief auditor into my office, Al Stumpfig. And he says, Charlie, he says, Peyton Fuller ever worked for you? Yep. What kind of a guy was he? Oh, he's fabulous. You sure he never cheated you or anything like that? And I said, come on, Al, tell me, what the hell is going on here? Well, he says, Peyton found out he was too bright for his own good. You know, superintendent, the superintendent or the assistant super would always sign his card. Mm-hmm. And he needed some money to go back to Jamaica one time, needed more spending money. So he just neatly penciled in overtime hours and changed the totals and took it over there. I said, how much did he get into product for? And they wouldn't take my word. They went back and checked my records to see how much he worked. And I said, hey, he worked every one of those goddamn hours. I said, how much is in it? Well, somewhere between $7,000 and $10,000.
Oh, my God.
And so they actually paid the money back.
Oh, did he?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And then I got into fights with the head of personnel. What was his name? Domblowski or who was it?
Oh, not Donahue.
No, higher up. He went to Detroit.
Oh,
He had a long
Lewandowski.
Lewandowski and I had a real fight because we needed somebody, and I said I'd like to hire Peyton Fuller. What do you mean? No goddamn way, we fired him. I said he paid it back. It was their fault over there. They let him do that. I said, look, you're always wanting to hire minorities. This guy is really good. I said, I wouldn't take a PhD in fluid mechanics. I said, we can't touch any. There's nobody around here smart enough to do that. No, absolutely. I says, listen, I know we hire cons, out of the prisons, and we get points for them. And we hire black females that have got, contagious diseases and whatnot. We get extra points for them. You forgive all those. But here's a brilliant
P. Guenther of 5607 West Maple Rapids Road in St. John's, Michigan. The recording was made by Jim Walkinshaw at the Oldsmobile History Center in Lansing on October 30th, 1990. This is tape number 3 of 3 tapes. Okay, back to Peyton Fuller.
But Peyton, that was the one that I lost that battle with. They never gave an inch. They never gave an inch, and I had to be very careful because Peyton. I told Peyton, I said, anytime you want to use me as a recommendation, fine. And I got calls from all over the guy.
Really, he was really looking.
Well, when he was finally got his PhD, Continental Oil talked to me from Texas, and he said, we got stuff down there in the ground, and it's just like the stuff you melt to put on your roof. And we were wondering whether you thought he could do that. And I says, I can't speak for his capabilities in that area. But I said, he always did I was very careful. I said, he always did a damn good job for me. And I even talked with personnel about this. About, what do I tell them? They said, well, you got to be very careful because he can have you in court if you say anything about it. And I said, I will speak only about the personal experience I had with Peyton as a person. And I always used to tell him the Bud Hoffman story about Bud Hoffman being out of Baltimore and had a real love for the N name. And since Peyton took his place all the time, he and Bud worked really close together, and Bud really got to like him. And one of my many parties, Christmas parties, where I invited everybody that ever worked for me, Bud and Peyton are sitting next to one another, and Bud's had a few too many drinks. And he asked Peyton, he says, do you ever watch, he says, he says, the funniest cartoon in all of television is the one where the nigger sergeant's talking to the guy in the ranks. and the look on Bud's face was priceless because he suddenly realized he had said nigger sergeant, and Peyton just didn't let it faze him. And Bud came into my office the next day And I thought, we've really done something here. Bud says, you know, he says, I went home, and he says, I felt terrible all evening. He says, Peyton's the nicest nigger I've ever known my whole life. He's really a great guy. And I went ahead and used that word in front of him that way, you know. And I thought, well, Bud, you know, I think, you know, to get somebody from Baltimore with your background to finally admit to something like that there is a difference, you know, I thought that was really fabulous. But I had a lot of people call me about him. And I don't know who he finally went. I think there was...
Was he one of the, what I call early black guys, Charlie, that we had?
I think he actually preceded them.
He was actually ahead of the wave.
That's ahead of the wave, yeah. Because he just came in as a summer student. He appeared out of nowhere.
Yeah.
I think he was an extra. I think somebody in personnel hired. And he, you know, he was soccer coach out there. And he always wound up working for me. Because, you know, once he learned broadcast, he did the broadcast several summers. Because Bud was always having a heart attack, you know. Then he'd go back to smoking his cigarettes, drinking his martinis. And let's see, I guess we've exhausted that one.
Okay, and we kind of covered the car assembly.
Yeah. I guess the only other one that's worth telling that came out of the car assembly thing, because I told you we did a lot of systems for other people.
Yeah.
And Elmer Cole, one of his famous inventions was he was going to put in corrals out there beyond 150 and put in and let the cars sit in the corral while they went and checked everything out to make sure they were ready to ship and whatnot.
Was this with Sentinel kind of thing, or this was...
Really, this was almost pre-Sentinel.
Pre-Sentinel.
Yeah. Because they had passed the law that if you ship a car and it doesn't have all of its approvals and it gets out on the, you know, and it gets the customer, there's a $10,000 car fine. And I don't know how many cars, a lot of people didn't realize, would be almost to California or almost to Arizona, and they'd have to turn them right around and ship them all the way back because they hadn't been properly checked out. So that was when Zumian was working for me. And I came up with a concept, and Zumian and I developed it together, of what Elmer Cole referred to as Charlie's aspirin tablet. Because I said, Elmer, we'll get you a computer, and you can put it, you know, you can take all of those history cards and you can input, you know, everything you need, and then it'll be online, and we'll have a terminal out there in the shipping gate, and they'll ask permission to put it on the trail car, permission to ship it. God damn you, Charlie, that's, you know, that's Charlie's aspirin tablet. And we finally went ahead and, over his dead body practically, we went ahead and we installed it. We bought the equipment for it. We did their work. We bought it, and we installed it, and we tried it out, and we made it work because it was hooked in with tri-level, but it was really, most of it was theirs, and they had to input the data, and then there was the one guy, the executive vice president came, and he was after, I think he was the one that took the place of the one from Fisher that had the heart attack, or they went bonkers and, you know, never was the same afterwards. Was there a Jenkins? There was a name with a J. He was only in there for a short period of time, and he came to Oldsmobile, and all of the heads of state had to sit down there and say what their brightest contribution for the year was. And reliability got up there, and they talked about the electronic gate. And Mooney kept hitting Knight, what the hell is that? What the hell is that? I've never heard of that before. They never got money for that. What the hell is that? Finally, Kendall, the light came on. He says, don't you know what that is? That's Charlie's aspirin tablets, and those bastards made a presentation to the executive vice president, and he loved it so well, and then GMAD plants
went and did that?
Went and did that.
Oh, my God.
You know? And did we get credit for that? I imagine they got an extra bonus that year, a hero badge for that. So that was another, and Zummy and I The only thing we had was a hell of a lot of self-satisfaction
Yeah,
because we
to
made
know
it,
that you
we
did.
invented it,
Sure.
made it work.
Know that you did it.
And
What
let's
about
see,
Sentinel?
never had anything to do with
Nothing
that.
to do with that.
Nothing to
Okay.
do with that.
Tommy Tompkins?
Never had much to do with him either, except
Okay.
his temper tantrums and his
Uh,
drinking and his staying away and never coming to work. And well, but we don't really want to get
No, no,
into
no,
those
no,
kind
no.
of things here.
I was thinking in terms of the department.
No, Sentinel was sort of a thing by itself,
Yeah.
and we never really. They invented it, they did it, and we never really got into it that much. And in some place along the line, I think those are the times when Sentinel came along. Do you remember what years that was?
That must have been in the middle 70s somewhere.
Wasn't that also about the time when we did Stack Pack, 71, 72?
Could have been.
And
yeah.
Frank and I were totally.
We were buried in that.
We were buried in that, and the rest of the world went on, and that took a couple of years, and so that sort of went away. And then, of course, somewhere in there was some scallywag went to Standards and ran Standards over there, and he first got Vetter to come over there to try to modernize the thing. And the following year, Bill Meade was going to retire. And I kept telling him, you and I will fight like cats and dogs. And I hate to, I went through that with Mooney when he became the first supervisor in the final assembly. And I said, you and I will just fight like Bob and I did when we first did that. And that's hard on friendships. And but that's when I wore the black armband for 3 weeks.
But it came off.
Oh, I really enjoyed it, and we really changed purgatory. And I remember the long lecture from Mel Hammond came over to my office, and he said, people don't call that purgatory. And all these stories that you make up about how we threaten our people over here and said, if you screw up, we'll send you over there. I said, we don't do that. I said, Melvin, don't give me all that shit. As I said, it happens. And he really had his feelings hurt. But I think, that really was true. I mean, there were a lot. That crew that you had over here had to be the most unhappy crew that you ever saw. And people are always trying to break out.
Yeah.
And turning that whole thing around and going modern and getting the computer system in, they're working with the British and we went from one extreme, we went way out to the leading edge. Somebody told me the other day that the Novels that we bought way back then, and that's got to be almost that's got to be 8 years ago.
Yeah.
They're still the leading edge of the technology. Yeah. And that's still the leading edge of the technology. Did you know that?
No.
Yeah. That's still the best way to go. I described it to somebody, and they that's still the latest technology.
Yeah.
And getting those people to turn around and doing the thing with Carol, I always thought that was the highlight of my career.
Which was that, Charlie?
And I can't remember her married name. Remember little Carol?
Carol, yeah.
The bartender from Houghton.
Yeah,
from
Houghton.
5 years with a civil engineering degree.
Right.
And
I can't remember her last name now.
Cook. It was
Carol
Cook.
used
And then
to
she,
be,
yeah. And with her experience with Pashasnek and the bad reviews that she got over there, and then finally convincing her that if she did a really good job in Standards and we got good ratings, I could probably get her a job someplace else. And then they came down and said this, whoever was the head of who was it? I think it's the crippled hand guy, Dave Lee came down and wanted to talk to me about Carol and also his boss, Sparra. And he says, this makes sense. He says, look at the reviews you've given her, and here's the ones they had back there. And I says, now wait a minute now. I said, who was she working for at that time? Fowler and Pashasnek. I said, and if you work for those two? He said, you're right. I'd get the same kind of review that Carol got, you know. So they were going to hire her, and at the last second, they got some guy from Fisher who had just jillions of experience, but wanted to get out of Cleveland, and they hired him. But they mentioned that the Fisher Body was screaming, and Fisher Body, the old white-headed guy over there.
Yeah, the
Red, you know, yeah,
Borma.
Red Borma. And Borma wanted to, you know, he said, have you got anybody I could steal? And we got Carol over there, you know, and she got into her field, and last I heard they were real happy. She got a commendation out of central office, which nobody ever done, because they had something with gas that came in designed by down there, and she told central office, this is dangerous. We aren't going to do this, because this is dangerous the way you've got it engineered. And they got really, you know, who are you? And finally she got it at a high enough level down there that they wrote a letter of commendation to her for having enough spunk to tell them that they were all screwed up. Yeah. So that one, and I think we had lots of cases like that. The most infamous one, of course, that I ever pulled off there was the big trade, where Hammond came over and he says, you're going to take Ludwig. And I said, no, I'm not. No, I'm not, because you'll be unhappy for the man whose name I won't mention, that you want to trade for. Oh, he is good. Look at the reviews he got. I know, but they're no damn good. You know, those are not accurate reviews. And they should never have been rated that high. Yes, he was. And we want to make that trade just because, what was his name? The Indian. Barefoot?
Oh, yeah, Barefoot.
Was it Barefoot or?
Yeah.
Barefoot. You know, all David did was say that he was going to put several sticks of dynamite in Barefoot's house and blow him all to smithereens if he didn't change, you know, get some things changed. So we finally took David, and that worked out. You know, I can't help it if he gets himself.
He shot himself in the foot.
Yeah.
Right.
And Openlander never forgave me. He said, Charlie, he says, that deal, you know, was the slickest deal. And I says, listen, your boss came over, because Barefoot left right after that, and Opie took over. And then he had to deal with the incompetence of the engineer we traded for. And every 2 months he'd come over and beat me on the head. Charlie, how could you have done that? I says, I told Hammond that he would be terribly unhappy that this guy didn't perform at that level, you know. And I said, he forced it down my throat. I refused to sign anything. And my boss finally, very reluctantly, made the trade. And I says, I can't help it if Ludwig's only with us for about a year. And we made a better engineer out. And Dave did us a good job. So they never forgave me for that. But you know, all the way around, all the people that we had there, do you know that I had people lined up to come into the department? You know, and you wouldn't believe the ones, you know, the other malcontent that always they finally wound up going over to transportation. They finally took him. What was his name? You know, he wanted to come over in our department. And there were all kinds of people that called me up and said, hey, get me out of this goddamn place. I want to work in standards, learn all the new things about computers and all the rest of it. So in that reason, you know, I wish to hell I'd done a lot of that sooner. I think I might have gone a little bit further at Oldsmobile if I'd simply, but I used to enjoy inventing things over there and doing all the other neat things over there. And if you go the next step up, then you're a paper shuffler.
Yeah, that's right. A lot of truth to that.
And
when did you retire, Charlie?
3 years ago this year. I guess it would, this is 90, oh, it was 87. I guess it was 87.
Summer?
April 1st. April Fool's Day, and nothing more appropriate than for Charlie to retire on April Fool's Day. But even there we had, you know, we did a lot in the engine plant, because Mooney at one time asked me to go down to see whether they needed a name manual down there. And I just walked the line down there and looked at all the things that they were doing wrong down there. And I told him, I said, A-manual is not their problem. I mean, that place is totally out of control. Everybody, we took pictures, and we used to use that as an example when with all the new laws where you couldn't do things, certain things with stock, and you get to go to jail if you do these things. And we used them as examples. Because, everything they did was illegal down there. They dumped stock and, it was only, I didn't want to go over there. But it was a choice of working on Verlinden Street for the general manager over there and specializing in his, where his head count was and going around. And bagman, and that was not my cup of tea. So rather than that, I talked what's his name down there around the corner from me in his office. And I said, "Can you get me out of this and rescue me?" But I had to work 3 years for Harvey Whitman. But we also did a lot of new things down there on the assembly line in the old V8. And we did a lot in the way we really developed a lot of new things in air tools and changed the corporation's thinking on what the latest, who had the best air tools and whatnot. And they got a lot of that we developed a lot of things that forced SPI. But anyway, that company developed a lot of things for us that they had just had up in their heads, or we developed, some of our concepts.
SPS.
SPS.
Yeah, that's it.
And they developed special computers that were independent, because we didn't want to have EDS being on the damn thing. So we were able to buy it as part of the package, and that's what's really allowed them to corner a lot of the market since then. They got North Star, and they got the next big one coming up, and so that worked out real well. It was sort of final coup de grace.
Yeah, that's the last couple of years.
Yeah, that was the last years, which were quite interesting. And that's about it.
Nice job.
We had most enjoyable life, and I wouldn't have gotten out at that time, except that Bill Sutton finally raised hell with everybody and says, "Hey, not fair, Charlie's engineers are retiring at 53, and you got him here and he's 59, and you keep telling me he can't go. That's the reward you get for working 35 years, and really, and doing working for the company, not for himself." And finally, he got him talked into letting me go. And that's it. And I don't carry, the only time I wear a shirt like this anymore is to come in here to visit.
Attaboy.
Okay?
Okay. Thanks, Charlie.